When you're fed up with fighting food and your body, join us here. I'm Allie Shapiro, creator of the Truce with Food program and your host for Insatiable, where we explore the hidden aspects of fighting our food, our weight, and our bodies, and dive deep into nutrition science and true whole health. Fair warning, this is not your parents' health care. This is a big rebel yell to those who crave meaning, hunger for truth, and whose lust for life is truly insatiable. Believe me, freedom awaits. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 6, Heal Hashimoto's Naturally and Pragmatically, Joy Phillips' story. So how many of you out there have Googled, how do I eat for depression or eat for Hashimoto's, right? And what comes back is basically a really strict diet, telling you to sleep, stress less, etc., but not a lot of how, right? And you have to do all of this without, as Joy would say, an Oprah chef and budget, and you've got a job and kids and all this stuff. So I want you to listen today to Joy's story so that you can learn how Joy went slow to heal faster. In under a year, she put her Hashimoto's in remission and lost 30 pounds as a side effect of my holistic and realistic to remain optimistic, as I call it, healing framework, Truce with Food. I wanted to have Joy on today because even though she had a Hashimoto's diagnosis, this approach also enabled her to stop taking her anti-anxiety meds and avoid taking the antidepressants a doctor had recommended for how crappy she was feeling. We also get into the nuance of what is the healthy choice, including how sometimes you're going to learn even potato chips are the healthiest choice. You can still keep your Hashimoto's in remission, as Joy experienced. And I really want you to pay attention also to why it's necessary to address your emotional health as well as your physical symptoms for radical healing. So sit down and enjoy Joy's really inspiring story and know that you too can do this as long as you go slow to go faster. Enjoy. So I am here with my client, Joy Phillips, today.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being here. Before we get to Joy's real world, grit and glory, food freedom story here, a couple of things. Remember to check out my website and the What is your comfort eating style quiz. It will help you start to get on your own truce with food in a really helpful way. And there's also a secret insatiable episode. So if you love the podcast, you will love this episode. It's super helpful. And I think that's it. So Joy.
Hi.
Hello.
How are you?
Well, we'll get to that at the end of it, in the midpoint, and how you're doing too. So this season is about renewal, and I want to focus on the identity, the renewed identity you came out of after going through Truce with Food and what really shifted for you. And I want people to hear your story because it's really inspiring and it's going to give a lot of people hope, especially because it didn't happen in a straight line. That's not how things happen.
Nope. Not for me, not for general public.
Yeah. So we met back in February 2017, correct? Yeah.
Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So tell me what brought you to deciding to do Truce with Food. What had just happened? What were you just diagnosed with? Tell us the beginning of your story, chapter 1.
Okay, chapter 1.
Well, I mean, chapter 1 of our relationship because you can start.
Yeah, there's lots of, I guess there was, there were definitely some pre-chapters before that. But our chapter, I guess, it did start in February of 2017. And I came to you completely lost and looking for answers and I was probably at my low of low at that time. I had just recently been diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis in December of 2016. And all of these things personally were happening to me as far as physical things that I was feeling for the first time. I was having the diagnosis with the Hashimoto's thyroiditis. I was also having irregular heartbeats, that they were premature ventricular PVCs at that time. So there were lots of things that were happening. It was really hard for me to lose weight. I had just this really hard struggle for probably about 4 years in losing weight. And all of my doctors were saying, it's your thyroid levels are quote unquote normal. And they were just testing the what was it, TSH, thyroid level that would always just come back normal. So I was just feeling really stuck. And at the time, my best friend introduced me to you via your podcast, and you were having a Cookie Isn't Just a Cookie seminar. So she and I attended it, and going into it, I was extremely nervous. It was like an all-day retreat, and I was really nervous because I didn't know what to expect. I was expecting, I didn't know what to expect going into it. And it was the best thing ever. When we went in, and there was a small group of us, and you basically gave us an introduction to a Truce with Food program. And I left, and we identified what our stories were, touched on that briefly. And I left thinking this was the best thing that I feel like I had experienced in a long time. I had never been to therapy before. So having gone to that, it was the closest thing to therapy. I said that to my best friend on the car ride home. But I was kind of like, I don't like my story. I think Allie got my story wrong. I was resisting already. Which
that resistance, which is
which meant that I was a perfect candidate.
Well, what I remember, I still laugh about this to the day. I remember because we chatted to make sure if Truce with Food was the right fit for you, because this isn't people, if it's not the right time or whatever, like it's not going to work for either of us. But I remember you had like looked at some of the Hashimoto's protocols, right? And it was like basically like all or nothing, right? Which is the exact same pattern we have to get out of when we're in our stories. And you're like, okay, I could do this if I had Oprah's chef. And we're hashtag Oprah's chef.
Exactly. If I had $1 million and Oprah's chef God, it was that supermarket list was enough for me to just say, there's no way I'm going to ever be able to tackle this.
Yeah. And I remember being like, we'll break it down step by step. And okay. So but I just think that was so funny when you said that. It was and I think for everyone listening, if you do get a diagnosis, it can be so overwhelming because not only, it's relieving to finally have to know something that's wrong with you, right? Like, okay, now I can put together a plan. But then when you go into the functional medicine community or the food as medicine community, it tends to be people giving you plans who do health for a living. So they're like, of course you can change your life around this, rather than how does it fit into my life as someone who doesn't have a trust fund or Oprah chef, correct?
Right.
Or isn't immersed in the health field.
Exactly. And then just to tackle it and to know exactly where you can go from there. And at that point, when I saw you, I was completely lost. One of the other things that had happened around that time also was I had just recently got a biopsy on my lymph node in my neck. So at that time, it was kind of like, is that associated with Hashimoto's, or is it anything thyroid related? All of it at that time, I just felt so uncertain and so confused, and just with the diagnosis of Hashimoto's kind of gave me an answer as far as, or validation to know, okay, I'm not crazy. These are the symptoms that I've been experiencing for so long, but where do I go from here? How do I fix it? And what do I do next? So intro, Allie.
And I think this is a really important piece to identity change, because for people listening, to have sustainable changes, like you're going to hear Joy's changes and that she's still keeping up to this day, you have to have an identity shift. And that's not a mindset. That's not an aha. You can have an aha, but then you have to implement the aha in all the places the aha is showing up. But tell us, you grew up with like a very meat and potatoes family, right? Like healthy food was not something that like, oh, I can just go gluten-free and I know what tea is. Like, tell people what lens, I call it a lens, but what mindset and identity and how you approached food and exercise when you got your diagnosis before Truce with Food.
Yeah. Before Truce with Food, or I should back up. In the beginning, growing up, it was, like you said, a meat and potato upbringing. I grew up in an Irish Catholic family. We weren't allowed up from the table until we finished our plates. It was just anytime we had a vegetable, it was probably just completely drizzled either with tons of butter, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Healthy fats are good. Or, cheese with, it's just terrible. It's terrible. But
when you said in the beginning, I was thinking of like Adam and Eve and they show the apple. It's like, but for most of us growing up, it's like in the beginning, there was the golden arches, Yes.
Yeah, pretty much. That was our upbringing. So or if we had vegetables, I mean, I love my parents, but if we had vegetables, they were usually, like frozen vegetables, or not necessarily always like, the fresh veggies. It was something that was in the freezer that, then you stick in the microwave and you put a slab of butter or cheese whiz on top of it. So, and my parents, God bless them, they still do it till this day. They just did it at Easter too. So sometimes you just can't break the mold. I just choose not to partake in it.
Well, let's talk about that, because I remember it was Easter when we were working, and you were trying to bridge this new way of eating with your family, and it didn't go over so well. And I think this is so important, because when we hear these like quote unquote transformation stories, it's kind of like, oh, and then I just told everyone I was gluten-free and everybody supported me. And they were, but you had a different experience, not only with family, but some friends. So can you talk about that and how you had to, what we talk about in the process of Truth with Food, the tools and stuff, and how you work through those with your family and friends who, I remember one friend referred to you as a carb Nazi.
Yes.
Even though you can eat carbs, just not gluten. So
just not right. That was tough. But yeah, so I mean, the benefit of, well, first, let me just say, like, going gluten-free completely changed every aspect of my life. I mean, I put aside physically, but I mean, emotionally, I just feel like when people say you are what you eat, and the benefits that food can do for you on a daily basis, they're not kidding. I mean, prior to going gluten-free and around the time that I joined or started Truth with Foods, I was also, I mean, I actually didn't touch on this, but I don't even know if you knew this, Allie. I think we talked about it briefly, but my primary physician at the time wanted to put me on antidepressants. And I was also taking anxiety medicine at least twice a week. So when I started to go gluten-free, which was around Easter of last year, I had shown up for Easter dinner, and I thought I was coming prepared by bringing now this just goes to show you how not naive or uneducated I was as far as being gluten-free, but I brought mashed potatoes, which are gluten-free, but because the packaging said gluten-free, I thought, I'm going to bring these gluten-free mashed potatoes. I'll share them with everybody, and this will be my dish. And then I had a couple other things that I was possibly going to eat myself, because I knew going into Easter dinner, I love my parents. I love my dad, but there wasn't going to be anything there for me to eat that was going to be gluten-free. So I thought I need to come prepared. But I did not going into it, I didn't convey to him the importance of me going gluten-free, why I was doing this, having recently been diagnosed with Hashimoto's, the benefits that going gluten-free does for someone with an autoimmune disease, and the importance of it. So I never communicated that to him going into Easter dinner. So it was met with huge backlash. My dad shows his way, being Irish Catholic man that he is, shows his way, his love with food. And so he took it as a big insult that I brought my own food. You brought your own food. You brought your own food. It did not go over well. And so now, I mean, it's actually very heartwarming. And then it made me tear up a little bit this past Easter. He was so upset that he couldn't find, it's a year later, he couldn't find gluten-free flour to make he wanted to make like a blueberry muffin or some kind of dessert or something, and he couldn't find it in the supermarket. And so I said, Dad, you're not going to find it in, like ShopRite. You're probably going to need to go to a Whole Foods or something. And I said, don't worry, it's expensive. I will bring you some. I have plenty at home. But I mean, it just goes to show you, like, a year later, my family has just been, it took a while. I mean, obviously that was probably it was a big learning curve for all of us at that time. And they've all embraced it, with arms wide open at this point, once I communicated the importance of it. And they can physically see, the benefits of how I am having gone gluten-free. And emotionally, I haven't been on anti-anxiety meds since, and it's been a year.
That's amazing. And
huge.
You have some shit that we're going to talk about. So it's
it's huge. It's pretty huge. And yeah, I never went on the antidepressants. I've always tried to do a holistic approach with everything. I went off birth control as well too. So I just feel like it was just a whole refresh start button. And I just feel like a completely different person. And I absolutely, I mean, I've said this to you after completing Truth with Food. there was the emotional side of things that I wasn't prepared, or I guess I'm not necessarily prepared, but I didn't know that there was going to be all of that and so much more taking Truce with Food, that healing that part of it, along with going gluten-free, I think is just as important as, what you actually eat.
I'm so glad you brought that up because, I always look at things from like a physical, emotional, and soul level. And like, what's the metaphor? And autoimmune is us emotionally attacking ourselves, right? In some form. And so tell us, I'm so glad that you said that because I was going to ask you, but how, like going in, you probably thought, you shared this on social media, like, oh, I thought I was going to learn like some nutrition and some emotional stuff. And it was like, so in your words, like, how do you weigh the emotional stuff now? And what did you really discover was the emotional crux of your healing that had to happen in terms of your emotional patterns?
Well, that's a good question. Measure the emotional crux.
Or I mean, you shared the specific example with your parents of like speaking up rather than avoiding.
Yeah, so that was a huge part of it. The whole notion of, so my story was when I feel unsettled, I feel unsafe. But part of that was I would feel safe being invisible. So getting into the root of, well, why? Why do you feel that way? And how can you use your voice more? And I'm thinking of something that happened last week. So again, this wouldn't have happened had I not completed Truce with Food. But so the idea of being invisible, whether I was at work or amongst a group of friends, because I think as part of Truce with Food is, identifying your stress response. And so mine is an avoider and occasionally an accommodator with my family, hence I'm always, trying to take care of my sister, trying to take care, of my parents, trying to fix, quote unquote, fix them going pre-Truce with Food. Now it's kind of like, accepting what they do is what they do and I can't control it. But as far as the notion of being invisible or now having completed Truce with Food and finding my voice. So there was a coworker who had walked into the back of the building and I was standing around with 3 other gentlemen and we were discussing a project and he walked in and I said, "Good morning." And I addressed him by name and he walked in and said, "Good morning, fellas." And then I said, "Enjoy." But typically, and everybody kind of laughed a little bit, but typically, I mean, had it been a year ago, I may have just like, oh, okay, he just walked in and whether or not he considered me invisible or whatnot, or it would have affected me in a way where it probably would have bothered me. And this time it was just kind of like, meh, I'm going to make him aware that I'm here. And then it's just address it and move it on.
Well, and I love in a funny way too, right? Like you're a really funny person. So it's like you forget seeing that side of yourself when it feels unsafe, when it's uncertain. And so
yeah.
I love that you use that little example because if not, like, right, the inner protector is like, why didn't he say ladies? Why, and it's like, and you spiral and that exhausts you and then you eat because it's like,
right.
Fuck it.
Yeah. Fuck it, chuck it. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And for everyone listening, Joy was referring to as the stress response is your comfort eating style. So if you take the quiz at AllieShapiro.com, you can find out what you are. And again, these are the patterns that we work on in Truce with Food. So I love that. But that's like a very new skill set, right? Is like finding your voice and speaking up and advocating for yourself.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it goes along with, all aspects, especially in the beginning when I did go gluten-free. It was kind of like I was cautiously, especially in group settings. I mean, my friends and I are very social and we constantly go out to eat. So I was cautiously speaking up and maybe not as confidently as I do now. I mean, now obviously everyone's well aware. And even I'll occasionally still get questioned like, oh, but a lot of the service industry, once you say, you have a gluten allergy, and I don't necessarily have an allergy, it's a sensitivity, which in the beginning I was very kind of confused. Well, how do I approach this? Because I don't want to be, you and I discussed this, I don't want to be a fraud. I don't want to be a phony, when it comes to this, because I know that there are, it's obviously non-celiac related. It's not like I'm going to have this drastic allergic reaction, but it is enough for me to know how much I feel better being off of gluten that I don't want to do this. I don't want to engage in it on a regular basis or a daily basis. So my family and I were in Disney in Epcot. And the waitress, we ate at a Chinese restaurant, and the waitress was so kind and just very informative as far as gluten allergies and everything or gluten sensitive dishes that I could eat. So, and she even brought out the tamari soy sauce, right, which is great. Brought it out in the full container from the back. It looked like it was probably from like Costco, not even like the packets. And I don't know if it had ever been opened, but I was using it. I mean, it was great. So my brother-in-law ordered the dumplings, and they looked really good. And I thought, I'm going to just try a tiny bite. And I told her I did not have an allergy, but the waitress came over and I pretty much was like gluten shamed at that point because she said, no gluten. She just started screaming at me. And I said, no, it's okay. It's okay. And I had already told her what the difference was. So I'm more comfortable in that regard. But in the beginning, I mean, when something like that would happen, or people would make, if the servers would make I always called it like a big to do. I don't want to inconvenience anyone, in the beginning, as far as being gluten free, it just made me laugh at that point. My brother-in-law's like, you just got gluten shamed.
And you can laugh about it now versus being like,
yeah.
And I think that's such a great story. And it's also because often we hear where you just can't care what other people think. And it's like, well, actually, we need to be in relationship with other people. And part of our food and weight issues are that we need to feel safe, that it's okay to belong exactly as we are. So there is this nuanced, tricky territory. And by practicing over time, and also as you eat more and more aligned with what works for you, you feel it more and more. So there's more incentive to stick up for yourself, but you also realize what your limits are and not. And that's such a nuanced perspective rather than being like, oh my God, I have to be gluten free all the time and I'm a fraud if I'm not. And it's like, no, I know my body really well. And I know that it's like me with dairy. Like I shouldn't eat a lot of it, but I can get away with a little bit.
Right. Right. Just a smidge.
I'll take the hit. Sometimes just like,
yeah,
I'm going to wake up with those zits in the morning, but that's
right.
okay.
Right. That's exactly right. That's what I said that to my friends over the weekend too. I told you that we had attended a close friend's brother's funeral, and at the luncheon there was, I am just, if one thing that I'm a sucker for, it's macaroni and cheese, and this macaroni and cheese looked good. So I said, I'm just going to take the hit. I'm going home right after this. I'm going to take the hit. I'm going to take a little spoonful. I'm going to try it. and sometimes you just do. That's what you do. I was in Epcot with my family. It's just, So yeah, it's about balance.
It is. Well, and this is kind of the paradox, is that the healthier you get, the more resilient the more consistent you are over time, the more resilient you get. And so then you feel it more than like you used to. So then you become like less inclined to do it, but you have to get there on your own, right? Versus a plan saying do all or nothing. I think because that identity shift has to happen to be like, oh, I'm someone who is not going to use medication. I'm going to not defy your doctors, but I'm going to take my own path and see how this works out. And I'm going to start advocating for myself, not just around food, but in work. And how has that been, re-seeing yourself as someone who will speak up more and more? I mean, what kind of shift had to, like, I don't know, has it changed the way you've seen yourself? Or is it like, no, this is who I always was. I just kind of stopped being that for a while.
I think that's who I always was. I just stopped for a while. I was on a hiatus for a few years. But now I'm back.
Down.
Intermittent. It was the bucket chuck it error that just lasted a little longer than it should have. No, but I think it's good. I think it's, recognizing and using my voice more confidently. You and I discussed this. It was, comparing myself to friends, coworkers, status of where they may have been in their lives versus where I've been. It's just, I don't feel that at all anymore. And that's kind of like probably one of the biggest weight that has been lifted. I shouldn't say at all. Every now and then it does creep up, but it's not all consuming as it was, because nothing's ever perfect. And that was one of the things that I let go too. Imperfections are just as beautiful as anything else. So, I just think being comfortable in your own skin, and that's kind of like going Truce with Food program. That's kind of like where I ended up. I kind of wanted to be content, mind, body, and soul. And at the end of the day, that's where I was, 3 months, 6 months, and even now. I mean, you and I discussed this, that even when you might feel like you're in a story, it doesn't feel like you're going down a downward spiral either. It's you're up that spiral staircase, and you're going to use the tools that help you get through. It doesn't feel like it's an all or nothing or end all be all case. There's always an answer or solution.
Yeah. So first of all, you need to give yourself credit. You didn't just let go of the perfectionism. You worked through that shit. Like that's not something that you just say, oh, the hell with. Why would I do this all those years? The entire way of seeing the world, it takes a little bit more effort than that.
It's 37 years. You're right.
What if you could take a pill to be okay with imperfection, man? I may pop that once in a while. But so that's part of the process, right? Of realizing, again, to come back to the food terms, like, okay, maybe the first time my dad's going to hate these mashed potatoes and he thinks it means this and I mean that, but then I learn and I try again. And so that is part of letting go of imperfection or of perfection, is knowing I can still get results and I can learn about this, which you did. I mean, you were on a huge learning curve, I mean, it was kind of badass to be like, the doctors are like, here's anti-anxiety meds and depression. You're like, I'm going to find my own way. Like
that's kind of like, I mean, thank you. I just really just did not want to, in my gut of guts, literally, I mean, who would have thought, like, my gut is telling me what's causing this is also telling me don't do what this doctor's saying to do. And that's where I was come February of last year, where it was like, I'm going to buy all these books. And then by the grace of, God and social media, I was introduced to you.
That's hilarious. By the grace of the God and social media. So, and I want to kind of circle back before we get to kind of present day and how you're and where you are now, because we've had other clients on and you and I always want to emphasize that this doesn't end, even though and we'll get there. Not and kind of the booby prize is that now that you're not eating, you're feeling everything. Wah, wah.
Thanks.
What? No, we'll get to that. But you mentioned before about working through the imperfection and being able to be in process with your health and yourself and still get results. And you were talking about the weight of that. And you did lose weight and you lost 20 pounds in the program and then 10 pounds afterwards. And how do you view weight loss now? Because the conventional narrative is calories in, calories out. No one's saying, are you still avoiding? Are you,
yeah.
How has and it doesn't, again, for people listening, it doesn't mean that you completely ignore calories. I mean, I don't count them. I don't know if you do or not.
No.
Okay. Yeah. So
no, I don't. No,
okay.
I don't.
So what do you think worked for you then in terms of the weight loss, like in your guts of guts?
I think figuring out when we did the exercise of figuring out whether or not you're a slow, medium, or fast burner.
Mm-hmm.
Helped, which I fell within a medium burn type. So Mediterranean diet works best with me. Proteins, carbs. I have to have carbs. I mean, healthy fats, avocado is just become my best friend. I had it for lunch today and one of my best friends said, are you sure that's enough? I had, some chips and guac and then a soup and she said, are you sure that's enough food? I'm like, do you see this guacamole? Oh, give me all this guacamole.
Well, what's really interesting is because most women especially need carbs, but if you look at a lot of these autoimmune protocols, it's like no grains. And you found out that you needed some of those. Otherwise, like what do you notice happens to you? I know I kind of like hit a wall and I can't keep my eyes open.
Yes, I crashed with, and very over emotional, because I need the grains. I do need some carbs and I sleep better too. I just, like you said, you crash. For me, I feel like it creates some level of insomnia and I also don't have any energy. So doing that and figuring out what type of burn type I am, and then also making sure that I always have a blood sugar balanced meal. I mean, I can feel myself when my blood sugar starts to crash or starts to lower. I was traveling for work a couple weeks ago in Chicago, and I was at a convention center 10 hours of the day. So I didn't necessarily always have access to blood sugar balanced meals, but it was always about making healthier options. And I remember in the program, you said, and I'll never forget this, just to have some kind of healthy fat snack with you. So whether it was a Kind bar, or you said also, instead of going for something very sugary, grab a bag of potato chips. And so one day I just had to do it because I needed some fat. So I grabbed a bag of Lay's potato chips, and that's what I ate, because at the time that was the only option. We all get stuck. Everybody gets stuck, whether you're at a train station, you're traveling. I mean, we've all just had moments like that. So just making sure that I always just have blood sugar balanced meals. Before starting Truce with Food, I was constantly checking the scale every day, probably multiple times a day, because it was an obsession. And that was like one of the things that you had encouraged me to try to let go of. And to this day, there were some people, and I was comparing myself in the program to those that were able to just hide the scale, not look at it. Well, that was not me. I couldn't do it. But maybe now, I might weigh myself once a week, but I'm also not beating myself up from it. Coming back from Chicago and everything that I've had going on this month, I'm up some pounds, a couple pounds. It's not really, but I'm not beating myself up for it either. I'm not freaking out about it either. It's just a number. I'm not obsessing about it. And at the end of the day, I know that, okay, if I eat out of alignment one day, it's not going to make me go on a downward spiral out of control. Tomorrow's a new day. I could recalibrate, not even tomorrow, recalibrate for the next meal. And that's just, it doesn't affect me the same way it did before Truce with Food.
Well, and I love that you use the potato chips example, because I've had to do that too. And people, right, if we're in these rigid categories of good or bad, it's like, oh my God, I ate potato chips, when if we're okay with imperfection and doing the best that we can. And again, that's a process to work through. That's, we were joking before, that's years of thinking that that's how we have to do to be successful with our goals. But potato chips have healthy fats in them. And sometimes you're in a convention center with no sunlight, you're on your feet, and it's about keeping yourself resilient enough so that when you finally can make an ideal choice, you're not crashing. And so I love that you use that example, because everything is about context. Sometimes potato chips are the healthiest thing you can do, and they're much better for you than pretzels.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Or just measuring the delta. That was one of the things that we learned in Truce with Food too, is using that as a comparison sake too, to make sure, don't beat yourself up for what you may have eaten in yesterday's meal is not necessarily what's going to take you down for today's meal. I mean, it's just, you have to find a measurable benefit.
Yeah. Setting yourself up so it's easier tomorrow.
Yeah.
A nice thing. And when you feel good enough, you do want to do that. So, okay. So that's the food stuff. What about emotionally? I love that we'll talk about the self-trust that you're talking about, why the scale, you trust that you're going to get back in alignment, right? That's ultimately why the scale doesn't have as much weight or oh, the food puns. We could keep going. Because and part of trusting yourself is because you work through that a whole round around the spiral staircase. You got on the pole, and
we joke about that all the time. I'm on the pole.
Yeah. And I have no judgment for people on the pole. I seriously do not. There is a woman named Stormy Daniels who was on the pole, and she may be saving our country. So, you never know.
Hashtag thank you, Stormy.
Yeah. I seriously do not have a judgment. I don't even, I just don't care about that kind of stuff. But you took a loop around the spiral staircase on the pole with your story as well around being unsettled. And so what about in terms of now that we could even ask you right now that you're back from Chicago and this crazy work time and being there for a friend, not only for his brother's funeral, but his dad as well. You've had a really intense emotional month. What do you know that you need to do emotionally to get yourself back in what we call back in alignment and Truce with Food? Yes, the food piece, but what we all come off those days where it's just like, oh my God, I need to get back to my regular scheduled routine.
Yeah. For me, regular scheduled routine definitely includes, and I didn't know this until doing Truth with Food, yoga and meditation has played a key role in making sure that I feel emotionally sound. Before, and occasionally, you and I discussed this too, I was really into doing boxing, high intensity exercise classes. Exercising for me was never, I always enjoyed exercising. It was when I would exercise or over exercise and then not see any physical results from it, that's when I would get angry and aggravated and just feel like, well, why am I doing this? But incorporating yoga and meditation is extremely important for me. I think also just making my needs known as far as, family pressures or making sure that there's just an even balance there, and just taking time for myself is really important. Enough sleep. I never prioritized sleep before, but knowing that I need to be home, if I'm out, because I have an active social life, making sure that I get at least 8 hours plays such a huge role. I mean, I remember going to doctors, conventional doctors, and they would say, well, you're just stressed or you just need to get enough sleep. And I was just like, that's just like a canned answer. They're just saying that. And then at the same time, for as much as conventional doctors, sometimes I think that they don't hit the mark on a lot of things. It's true. It's absolutely 110% true that sleep and stress play a huge factor, and especially in emotional stability. So yeah, just making sure that I always just take time for myself and speaking up if I feel like that's not happening, and just making sure that, I just prioritize that.
Yeah. I mean, what you just said there is speaking up and advocating for your needs it's bigly. Like it's really, really big. And what I love is it's kind of just become, and this is the hope with Truth with Food, is we don't necessarily give you more tools, right? Because then there's just more tools. Like, I mean, it sounds like yoga and meditation work for you, but it's like you discovered that through your own experimentation and your own framework, but we don't give more tools like light a candle and journal or take a bath or whatever, because then you fail at your self-care, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just about a mindset of checking in, reflecting, getting clear on what you need and want. And it sounds like you're doing that, which is awesome. And then these things that the thing about conventional medicine is, yeah, they know that the simple things like eating vegetables, staying away from sugar, too much sugar, you can obviously have some, but sleeping are all effective, but they don't know how. How do we actually change our behavior? And that's what I've built into Truth with Food, is actually how adults change. So that stuff, we start to want to take care of ourselves when we have the right process. And I think that's important for people listening, because we're taught, especially as women, right? The default is women are inferior. So of course you have an inner critic, you have an inner rebel, because of course you hate yourself and can't trust yourself, and because you're out of control. It's like, no, there are reasons that we don't do what we know we should. And they're often emotional. They're often really rooted into our nervous system based on past experiences. And logic alone just doesn't work for that. It doesn't work for change. And so I love that you've internalized it. And as a result, you realize yoga and meditation, sleep, and you can advocate for that. And other little things like that are actually big things, like when the manager says, hey, dudes, or
fellas,
yeah. It's like, and joy, but like,
yeah, hello.
Yeah. But if you think about how many more times you've done that over the past year, it adds up to a lot more comfort, reward, and less exhaustion,
Mm-hmm.
So
and confidence.
Yes. And confidence. Yes. We think confidence is confidence is, just so you guys know, the research shows it's based on self-efficacy, which is basically getting our needs met or learning what we need to do. We don't get confidence from people telling us we're awesome. Like, that's helpful, but we get a lot of confidence when we do hard things and we challenge ourselves. So let's kind of circle to present day, which we kind of kicked off with. Both of you and I are both in some stuff right now. Your podcast episode, not mine. So part of right now is, Truth with Food, I hope, prepares us for real life, not like, when we're on a spa vacation. Oh, that's fabulous too. So you've been dealing with a lot of stuff, work, a lot of funerals and death of young people, which is always extra hard. And so, even though you've lost 30 pounds, you're not on antidepressants, you're not on anti-anxiety, and you're sleeping well, huge improvements. And you can also be, dealing with real life. And so where are you now in terms of you've got this new identity of, oh my God, I can be an advocate and healer of myself with a great medical team as well. We're not like, we're not hippies yet on a commune. Although we've all talked about, in the Truth Food group starting.
We're going to get there soon.
Yeah, we're going to get there. Growth mindset. Hashtag growth mindset. We'll get there eventually when we all just stop doing our regular jobs, right? And regular lives.
Exactly.
Like, what's different now that you're in kind of like a really intense period of emotions and stuff? Because this is the thing, guys and ladies, when you stop eating your feelings, you got to learn to deal with them. And that's really the tools that we fine tune in Truth Food. So what's going on now? Where are you?
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of like it's spring. It's like a reset button in a lot of ways, renewal in so many ways. I feel like, I'm kind of working through some stuff as far as, work goes. And, obviously, like you had touched on, it's been a trying month for my one particular friend and being supportive and, just being there for friends and family. My dad was sick and just constantly worrying about his health too. So I guess where I'm at now or having gone through Choose with Food, I feel like nothing necessarily feels like it's a huge downward spiral. I am working through it all, trying to avoid the drive-through to the best of my capability. That was my $7, I think $7 cake in Truth with Food. And, I'm just kind of using the tools that we learned in Truth with Food. The playlist tools kind of been a huge help for me. I just came back from Pink concert on Friday night and
I went in Pittsburgh. Oh,
you did?
Yes.
So awesome, right?
Oh my God. I love her.
Yeah, she's awesome. So many songs for her were added to the playlist tool that help, but particularly, like her perfect song, I think perfect song. So that's been helpful tool.
Oh my God. That song. I love Beautiful Trauma. What
yes.
About Us? That Beautiful Trauma and What About Us got me through like the political year last year. I was just like, what about us? Like,
yeah, right. It's true. It's so true. I mean, like a lot of her songs are so poignant to where we are right now. So yeah, I think that it's just kind of realizing that it's not going to be, meltdown is not on the horizon. Whereas everything seems manageable no matter what comes my way. It doesn't necessarily feel like it's, as an avoider, you can tend to build things up. And I don't necessarily feel like I'm doing that. I'm just managing it and tackling it as I can and dealing with, whatever might be thrown my way. And, obviously daily stresses, whether it's work or health or whatever might be at present moment, everything just seems to be manageable. I'm not necessarily always eating in alignment of my choices of what I would want to be doing, but it doesn't necessarily feel like it's going to spiral out of control.
And I think that's so important because when we're spiraling out of control, we've lost self-trust is really what's happening. It's like, oh my God, I don't trust myself to course correct. And so F it. And that's where the spiral versus you're like, okay, I've been here before. And I've been unsettled before and I'm getting more and more resilient each time. And what I want people to take away, health is about resilience. It's a big component of it. Like how resilient is our body? How resilient are we emotionally? What Joy's describing is she's sitting with her feelings, right? They don't always get tied up in a nice and neat bow by the end of an Oprah episode, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, how I wish they could. The end of a self-help book, right? It's like, oh, you have the answers. There's like a lot of stuff going on. I'm sure most of you listening are have something weighing on your heart, your mind, right? And that metaphor, I think, is really apropos, but you're managing. And that's, I think sometimes we can't always be in killing it. I don't even like to use that war metaphor, but like, what is it? Smashing it or
yeah.
I sound like 90 years old. The whippersnappers saying these days, crush it. That's what they're saying. Recycle, crush it.
That was good. You sound just like my grandma.
I'd pinch your cheek and pull your ear if I could. But it's knowing that we can manage and building that resilience. And again, if you compare where you were a year ago, it's like you would have been. And so if you go to the drive-thru, you're still and you even told me before, you're like, I did hit the drive-thru, but I went gluten-free. It's like,
yeah, exactly.
and that's what we measure. That's what Joy was talking about earlier, the delta. Like, how far have I come? Not like, where am I? How far have I come? And that is what builds self-trust versus this magical thinking that one day you're going to crush it and everything's going to be perfect and you're going to ride off into fantasy land.
Because it takes work.
Yeah. Wah, wah, wah. But it can be rewarding work, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
I think your story is living proof. Like you said, like you've gotten into hot yoga. It sounds like your relationship to exercise has shifted instead of over-exercising. It's worked. And you're doing great with your food, especially given how crazy your schedule is and inconsistent it is.
Yeah. I mean, just always making the best. I mean, for especially this past month, just making the best decisions that I can, especially traveling. I just feel like I'm much more educated in that realm, and I'm not going to beat myself up if something is just, quote unquote perfect. I'm not going to beat myself up for a decision on food in that way. Somebody said something to me over the weekend because they're, obviously being around, family parties or friends or social gatherings with food that people bring. And, obviously a lot of it wasn't necessarily gluten-free. So I just made the best choices that I could. But somebody said, oh, how do you have the willpower? Where do you find the willpower? I didn't really necessarily have an answer. It was just kind of like, I don't perceive it as willpower, which is interesting because it's, back when I did Weight Watchers or when I did the Advocare or the 21 Day Fix, whichever one you wanted to pick, whichever diet at the time, that I feel like required more willpower because it felt like an all or nothing type regime, very rigid, very regimented. This doesn't feel the same. I mean, yeah, I'm gluten-free, but it doesn't necessarily feel like I'm going without either. And I definitely think it's because of the emotional work that was done in combination with, at one point during the Truth with Food program, I did the elimination diet. It was 21 days, and I ended up, I think, doing it for over a month because I just didn't feel like I was going without at that point, because I was basing it off of how it made me feel. So I guess I don't look at it as willpower per se, because I just feel better not eating it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, on a lot of those things, you're starving, right? It's like,
yeah.
Weight Watchers, if you eat the amount of fat you're supposed to eat, you use all your points at breakfast.
Right. It's like, here's a special K bar, and you're done.
But also, again, it comes back to this, like, our bodies crave health. They crave vitality. That does not mean we're always blooming. If we look to nature, there's a winter, summer, fall, spring, right? And like we can cycle in a day, like, oh my God, I'm feeling like I just can't handle. You just had a month of intense, I would say it almost like death, like the winter season, right? It's like, okay.
Yeah.
So now it's springtime now. Like I need to so we cycle, but the point is that there's a flow there. And yes, our body is always wants to move towards resilience and vitality. And again, building resilience makes you feel more confident. It's not, so it's not about willpower. I don't but again, if we look at things from a mechanical machine model, it's like, oh, inputs, you need more willpower. It's like, no, we actually do want to feel really good. And when we feel we can trust ourselves, we can tune into that rather than tuning to the outside world and trying to like not be, not look bad or whatever. I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but I love that you said that because it's just, there's a discipline. And I even think, and I've done other podcasts, food versus workout willpower. I said, we don't need discipline for this, but there does need to be a devotion to being on your own side and being willing to figure out what works for you. It doesn't take that long compared to like how long we've been dieting, but like you have to want to be on your own side and being willing to like learn and grow with yourself. And I think and what's more healthy than that,
Yeah. And accept that there's not necessarily a right or a wrong or good or bad. And so it's just figuring out, like you said, what works best. Yeah. And advocate for yourself.
Yeah. And I want to emphasize, as we wrap up here, there's frameworks that are important because as I've been listening to other podcasts and stuff, a lot of people, they want to get out of diet culture, but then they're taught that like, oh, give yourself permission to eat whatever you want, just kind of feel your way through things. And then what happens is people tend to gain a ton of weight or they get anxious or depressed because it's not the right things for them. And so I just want people to know, there is an option C of like learning a framework of your emotional and physical self. It's called Truths with Food. I spent 12 years of my life creating it. It's research based. Sometimes that can work for everyone, has to find their own path. I'm not advocating this for everyone, but there is this line, because I'm thinking if I'm a perfectionist and I'm listening to this, it's like, well, I still want to get results. And you've clearly gotten results. And so part of why you're not freaking out about going into a downward spiral is because you trust yourself, and like having a little bit of mac and cheese at a funeral for you doesn't matter. It doesn't affect your body, and knowing that is wonderful. So there is a framework so that you can loop back to what works. And as you figure out both emotionally and physically, you just want to feel better and better. And I think that's what, to me, says is what happened in your own health over the past.
Yeah.
It's been a year. Oh my God, it's been over a year.
It's been over a year.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
It's crazy, but I feel like a completely different person, but then I kind of feel like, oh, I could do more.
Well, that's a testament to what I'm saying. Like, once we start like being healthy, we're like, oh, what else could I do? What else? It doesn't become like, oh, I should have done that. It's like, what else is possible? And again, we don't always feel that way. I want to emphasize, because a lot of people, when you're listening from a perfectionist mindset, you hear, oh, it's going to be all good all the time. And like, that's not what happens.
No, that's not what happens. And it's okay.
Yes. You learn really valuable things in the mud in the winter, right? Like,
yes.
The winter seasons of our emotions. It's like there's a lot happening underneath the surface there. So
definitely.
Thank you so much. I've been forgetting to asking people this, but I'm going to ask you because I remembered. So what's your radical truth now? Radical
truth is that I'm perfectly imperfect. And that's okay.
Do you want to sing the Pink song to sign us out? No. Way to advocate for yourself.
Do you want more listeners?
Oh, so much. We're going to end on that. That was great.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you, Health Rebels, for tuning in today. Have a reaction, question, or want the transcript from today's episode? Find me at alishapiro.com. I'd love if you leave a review on Apple Podcast and tell your friends and family about Insatiable. It helps us grow our community and share a new way of approaching health in our bodies. Thanks for engaging in a different kind of conversation. And remember, always, your body truths are unique, profound, real, and liberating.